Summer. Day 56. Machynlleth to Dolgaflay. Route. Machynlleth, Corris, Aberllefenni, Dolgaflay. County. Powys, Gwynedd. I packed up my tent just in the nick of time this morning. As I was starting to roll up my sleeping bag and tent, it started spitting. There was a great big fire pit and shelter in the centre of the campsite where I put my bags and then put my waterproof rain gear. I left the campsite along the A489 to Machynlleth, and I felt so good this morning I could almost sing. I had a delicious breakfast of coffee, a crusty olive roll, an avocado, and a tin of sardines. It seems as though porridge doesn't really get my day off to a good start like other foods, even though a lot of walkers swear by it. At Machynlleth, I stopped at a co-op to buy some supplies for the day's walk. I left Machynlleth across the new bridge being built across the Afon de Vie. A billboard on the edge of the site has outlined the measures that the company is taking to care for the local landscape, and what they have managed to uncover during the construction of a new bridge includes bats and otters. I crossed the old Machynlleth Bridge and followed the Snowdonia Way into the National Park. The Snowdonia Way is a 94-mile long-distance walking trail which goes through the whole of the National Park. There are two variants. The first is a low-level walk, which follows valley tracks, hillside paths, and old rights-of-way. This is the route that I have chosen. And the second, a high-level option. The Snowdonia Way is described as the best way to get to know this part of the world. You'll see the most famous sights from the Great Northern Cliffs of Cadair Idris to the pass of Aberglaslyn, the Ogwen Valley, and Aber Falls. Extract from ldwa.org.uk. The stretch from Machynlleth to Corris was mostly road walking, and I didn't feel as though there was a lot to photograph, aside from the common woodland ferns, plants and mosses. However, coming into the national park, the landscape felt so remarkably plush and green, especially when I think back to the dry cracking soil of the coastal path just a couple of days ago. That day was so warm and dry, and yet when I sat outside my tent on the campsite, Snowdonia National Park was still covered in a dark rain cloud. On my approach to Corris, I passed a walker. He had begun his day's walk at Dolgaflay and had planned to make it to Aberystwyth by the end of the day. That was practically my week's walk. He was raising money to support motor neurons disease. He asked, "You going over Cadair?" As I had already decided not to go, but I was still intrigued, I asked, "How long does it take?" To which he said, "About 4 or 5 hours." My Ordnance Survey map was folded into its uniform rectangular sections, and to keep myself entertained, I tried to memorise the names of the hills which sat closest to the path. At Corris, I came to a small community shop. They sold bits of everything, including a lighter. I then stopped for lunch in a bush shelter, and it stopped raining. But not for long. When I left Corris, it started again. I followed the way through to Aberllefenni. As the rain got heavier, my optimism started to wane. I checked Google to see if the rain would stop. At Aberllefenni, I passed through huge tips of slate and blue cottages. The rain was coming down heavy as I made my way along the old turnpike road, and I met a farmer. He stopped to quiz me about my walk from the warmth of his Land Rover. As he was doing so, the pulp creases on my map were starting to disintegrate, and in spite of trying to keep it dry inside my waterproof coat, every time the paper rubbed against the Gore-Tex of my jacket, the town of Dolgaflay started to erase itself. I began to grow despondent and wrapped up my map in a plastic carrier bag and packed my camera into the top of my rucksack. I then walked as quickly as possible along Cycle Route 8 to the campsite in Dolgaflay. I was drenched. I got changed, showered, and put on my wet clothes into the campsite tumble dryers. I then spent the rest of the evening hiding inside my tent. The rain didn't seem as though it would let out. How did other walkers manage to get drenched and keep going day after day? I didn't do my usual nightly admin tonight, but instead I tried to go to sleep. I didn't sleep well either, and in the middle of the night the circling winds caused my tent to collapse. I had to do the midnight run and put all the pegs back in. When I did eventually fall asleep, I had a dream. I'd left my tent set up on the campsite and gone home. I was sat with my family in the living room, and my uncle turned to me and he said, "What happened to that excitement you had at the start of the journey?" Distance, 28.4 kilometres. Total, 1,028.5 kilometres.